Sparks rained down onto the decking, smelling heavily of scorched copper and Tuesday. Red light pulsed through the thick smoke inside the flagship. The machine screamed. The metal groaned. The Empire died. First Speaker Vorek stood on the high bridge, his silver-threaded skin glowing under the emergency lights as 40 star systems slid toward ruin. He yelled for an engineer, but his people were frozen. Beside the central glass column, a human void welder stood with greasy hands and a heavy iron thermal spanner. Joran Kato did not look at the alien lords or the flashing screens. He watched the white-hot crystal inside the casing vibrate until the bolts began to back themselves out of the floor. No warnings, no declarations, no mercy. 80 lords demanded an entire sector for their help. Would you have fixed it for free? 48 hours before the Grand Fleet lost its breath, Orbital Tether 44 smelled of fried fat and cheap soy calf. Joran sat on an empty oil drum, dragging a gray rag across his knuckles until the skin showed through the grease. The old repair bay was quiet except for the hum of a ventilation fan that always clicked on the third rotation. A shadow fell across his workbench as a slim, triple-hulled sunskiff drifted through the magnetic berth curtain. Its smooth hulls were painted the deep blue of a gas giant's core, but the left engine was whistling a flat, wrong note that meant the fuel line was choking on its own pressure. A single pilot stepped out, wrapped in a heavy worker's cloak that hid her crest. Joran did not ask for a name or a cargo list. He walked to the skiff, touched his thumb to the warm metal of the intake valve, and felt the tiny, uneven flutter of an overdesigned system. The ship was beautiful, expensive, and completely fragile. "The main coil is cracked," Joran said, his voice flat as he tapped his heavy iron thermal spanner against his left knee to catch the rhythm of the leak. "Your people built the casing out of silver glass. It looks pretty, but it cannot take the kick of a dirty jump gate." The pilot did not speak. She reached beneath her cloak and pulled out a small, heavy object, placing it on the grease-stained table between them. It was a blood-glass signet, a teardrop of crystallized magma that hummed with a faint, warm pulse whenever it came near a living hand. The gem was worth more than the entire orbital station, including the docks and the transport ships anchored outside. "I do not need a world," Joran said, pushing the glowing stone back with the tip of his finger. "I need 40 credits for the scrap iron and 2 credits for the grease. If you have a cup of warm recaf, I will call it even." The woman pulled back her hood, revealing the sharp, high cheekbones and clear gold eyes of Crown Regent Elishan. She stared at the human who was already crawling under her engine with a tube of sealant and a hand torch. 80 wealthy suitors from 30 sectors had seen her broken ship on their sensors, and every one of them had sent a message offering aid in exchange for a marriage contract or a moon. This man was simply cleaning her fuel line with an old wire brush. Before Joran could finish tightening the secondary valve, the bay doors blew backward in a shower of yellow sparks. 6 golden security skiffs dropped through the atmospheric shield, their magnetic clamps locking onto the rusted floorboards. Heavy footsteps rattled the deck as royal guards in white armor swarmed the bay, their long energy pikes pointed directly at the mechanic's chest. "You will step away from the Regent, human." A loud voice boomed through the speaker of the lead armor. Joran did not drop his wrench. He stood up slowly, wiped a fresh smear of carbon from his cheek with his sleeve, and looked at the polished white boots leaving deep, oily tracks on his clean floor. He hitches his heavy leather tool belt up his hip. "You are leaking hydraulic fluid on my dock," Joran said, pointing his tool at the leader's left ankle. "And you owe me 40 credits for the valve." Elishan stepped between the pikes and her guards, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum of the bay. "Lower your weapons. He is coming with us." Within 3 hours, the dirty void welder was standing in the center of the Sunspire throne room. The floor was a single sheet of pristine white marble that reflected the golden sky outside, and every step Joran took left a dark, greasy smudge behind him. Around the high amphitheater, 300 alien senators sat in heavy magnetic weave robes, their silver skin shining under the artificial suns. At the high podium stood first speaker Vorik. He was 7 feet tall, his face scarred by ceremonial acid, and his long fingers tapped a resonant crystal cane against the stone. He did not look at Joran. He looked at the grease on the floor with deep, quiet disgust. "The Suitor trials have been preserved for 40 generations," Vorik announced, his voice echoing off the high walls like breaking glass. "The heir must travel the outer rim in a crippled vessel to find those who offer aid out of duty, not greed. Yet the regent returns with a slave from the tethers, a literal dirt worker who smells of fuel." Elishan stood beside Joran, her royal crest held high. "The lords of the High Senate asked for sectors. They asked for trade routes. They asked for my hand before they would even open their hangar doors. This human fixed the core with a piece of iron pipe and asked for a hot drink." "He is an animal," Vorik sneered, his dermal plating turning a dark, angry purple. "Your systems are perfect, Regent. They are built on ancient formulas that his species cannot even read. To let a mechanic touch the bloodline is to invite the wild dark into our house." Joran stood completely still, his iron spanner hanging from his belt loop. He watched the grand senators argue, but his eyes kept drifting to the massive holoscreen above the throne. It showed the engineering schematic of the dreadnought Starcleaver, the Empire's greatest military vessel, currently anchored in the upper slipway. The screen was flashing blue and green, but to Joran the lines looked wrong. The alien engineers had layered system upon system, shield upon shield, until the central core was buried under 12 different cooling grids. It was beautiful, complex, and completely choked. Vorik struck his crystal cane against the floor 3 times. "If this human possesses the magic you claim, Regent, let him prove it. The flagship is dying. Our finest minds have spent 3 moons tuning the resonance filters, yet the core power drops 5% every day. If he fixes it, the Senate will recognize his claim. If he fails, he will be dropped into the void without a suit." "That ship is not failing from sabotage," Joran said, his voice loud enough to stop the murmurs in the Senate seats. "Your shields are too perfect. The multi-species fields are rubbing against each other, creating a localized temporal drag. Your computers cannot see it because they are programmed to think the system is incapable of a mistake." The chief engineer at Vorik's side laughed, a sharp clicking sound. "The human thinks an iron hammer can tune a harmonic crystal. Let him try. He will burn with the ship." An hour later, Joran walked onto the main engineering deck of the massive dreadnought. The room was 5 stories tall, filled with floating light displays and rows of silent alien specialists who refused to look at him. In the center sat the core, a massive, 20-foot column of pure blood glass that hummed with enough energy to level a continent. The air inside the flagship was cold and thin, tasting of recycled air and old metal. Joran did not look at the computer readouts. He walked to the main support pillar, took off his thick leather gloves, and pressed his bare palm flat against the vibrating metal bulkhead. He closed his eyes. Through the thick skin of his hand, he felt the machine's heartbeat. It was a chaotic, stuttering rhythm, like a runner trying to breathe through a wet cloth. The temporal drag was pulling at the ship's time filters, causing the digital timers to reset every 80 seconds. The alien engineers were trying to fix it by adding more code, more power, more grids. They were killing the beast with medicine. Joran opened his eyes and looked down at his left knee. He began to tap his leg, matching the wrong frequency of the glass core. He knew exactly where the knot was. It was located behind the secondary resonance crystal, where the digital clock was trying to sync with an analog power flow. "You need to shut down the tertiary cooling loop," Joran told the chief engineer, who was watching from the gallery. "If we drop that loop, the temperature will rise 300 degrees in 4 seconds, the alien replied. "The crystal will shatter." The crystal is already shattering, Joran said. It is just doing it slowly enough that you can't see the cracks yet. He did not wait for their permission. He walked toward the primary casing, his heavy boots clicking on the metal grating. Before him, the blood glass column began to turn from a deep, steady red to a blinding, angry white. The alarms began their long, high-frequency scream. This was the moment the bridge shook. Red light filled the sky as the dreadnought's main power grid gave way, dropping the internal gravity by half. First Speaker Vorik sneered from the upper deck, his crystal cane shaking in his hand as the perfect Solari vessel died of its own complexity. Joran Kato did not argue protocol. He did not check a screen. He just unholstered his heavy iron thermal spanner and smashed the primary resonance crystal with a single, two-handed swing. The glass shattered into 10,000 glittering pieces. The room plunged into absolute darkness as the main power died, and for 3 long seconds, the localized temporal drag snapped back like a broken rubber band. The cold air grew instantly hot, then perfectly still. Before the alien guards could grab his shoulders, Joran reached into his canvas toolbox. He pulled out a crude, heavy iron gear timer, an old mechanical clockwork piece he had pulled from a junked freighter on Tether 44. He jammed the iron teeth directly into the crystal housing, bypassing the digital sync lines completely. He turned the manual lever until it clicked. The shrieking stopped. The deck leveled under a steady, one-gravity pull. The dark blood glass core flickered once, twice, and then settled into a deep, quiet, crimson thrum that felt as solid as a mountain. The silence that followed was heavier than the ship's own gravity well. The Solari chief engineer dropped his data pad, watching the crude iron gears click over and over, governing the most powerful engine in the galaxy with simple, physical teeth. Joran wiped his hands on his trousers and looked up at the gallery. Vorik stood with his mouth slightly open, his dermal plates pale and gray. The first speaker slowly lowered his head, his crystal cane touching the floor in a stiff, furious bow of complete acknowledgement. Behind him, Elishin was not looking at the stabilized core. She was looking at the human's toolbox with an expression that had nothing to do with mechanical repair. Her hand rested on her belt, where the blood glass signet remained hidden. 10 years passed across the Solari Vale Empire like water over stone. The Sunspire throne room remained white, but the long transit docks at orbital Tether 44 had grown into 5 great rings of iron and weld smoke. First Speaker Vorik retired to his estates on the 3rd moon, his name forgotten by the young students who crowded the station's new halls. Whenever his personal transport docked for maintenance, he would bow his head slightly to the human instructors who walked past him in grease-stained jumpsuits. Inside the main office of the Cross-Species Technical Academy, a large wooden shelf held 3 things. A dirty canvas toolbox sat on the left, its leather straps worn thin by years of hard labor. In the center rested a heavy iron thermal spanner, its head scarred by the impact of ancient royal glass. On the right, the blood glass signet sat in an open velvet box. The magma core pulsed inside the stone, its red light fading and rising in a slow, steady circle that matched the low hum of the station's human-built engines.